Okay, so I think probably everybody has heard of Greta Thurnberg. She's the Swedish youth that began her career of climate activism at age 17, and she's kind of become the face of the youth movement. In the summer of 2018, she started sitting outside the Swedish parliament every Friday, striking on strike on her. So she started the whole idea of climate strikes. And then on September 20th in 2019, she led the largest climate strike in history that we've had. She's spoken in front of the United Nations, the US Congress, the Parliament, United Kingdom. In 2019, she was the Time Magazine's Person of the Year. But Greta's not the only youth prophetic voice on climate. Perhaps some of you have heard of Isa Hirsi. She's the daughter of a US Congresswoman, and she and her family immigrated to the US when she was just 12 years old from Somalia. And she's very concerned and interested in being a voice for the voiceless around this issue, because she saw firsthand the suffering that climate change has brought to her people in Somalia. Rising temperatures have wreaked havoc in the East African nations as the seasons have become more intense, long periods of drought. And Alexandria Villaseñor is 14 years old when she started, and she founded an organization called Earth Uprising, which is all about climate, global climate. Hiye Bastilla, 17-year-old Mexican girl, activist who has also started a number of organizations, Y on Youth and the Fridays for the Future, a New York City organization for youth, working on the climate issue. She even helped to organize the US global climate strike in New York City, where Greta spoke and became so famous. And then we've probably all heard about Vic Barrett, the 20-year-old who amassed 21 other young people, and they're suing the government for its central role in encouraging the climate crisis by supporting fossil fuel energy system. And 19-year-old Katie Elder, who again, she founded an organization that spawned the creation of over 40 other youth-led organization groups. So all of this is to say that youth are very active in this issue, and it's certainly understandable why they would be. We're fortunate today that we have two climate activists, young climate activists, with us to tell their stories, share their concerns, and hear our questions. We have Corey Robinson, who's a high school junior in the Miami area, whose particular interest and concern is on environmental racism, and Karim Dergal, who is going to talk to us about a sustainable diet and what we eat and how it affects other people. Hewan Jin just joined us. Good to see you, Hewan. So I thank both of our youth speakers for sharing their time with us. And I think Corey's going to speak first. So yeah, we'll have both of them speak, and then we'll have the question and answer.
Okay. Before he presents, I just want to take this small little time frame to thank you all so much for coming and for listening to us. So Corey and I are actually in school together, and we have done presentations towards other schools in our area, but we haven't gone so far as to go across the country to California, and it's such an amazing opportunity. So thank you guys for that.
I concur. Thank you so much, Karim, for saying that. And I express the same amount of gratitude towards the opportunity. So thank you for lending your ears, lending your time. I really do truly appreciate it. So without further ado, let me go ahead. Okay, so my presentation, as was spoken, is about environmental racism and how it impacts us all. So well, you can see a definition, but I would like to propose a question. What do a lot of you guys and people of the audience believe is environmental racism? What factors contribute to environmental discrimination and racism?
Access to resources.
Yes, that's a really good one. Anyone else?
Oh, well, geographic location.
Yes.
That's a good
But a
question.
general, yes, that's also a really good one. But a general definition is environmental racism is the concept that not all communities are created or affected equally by environmental degradation, such as pollution or assistance when it comes to medical attention and so on and so forth. And some examples of this are various structures like hospitals, grocery stores, and placement of landfills and incinerators, as well as access to businesses and commercial commodities such as agriculture. So a lot of us may ask, who is at risk of these very, very profound and incorrect injustices? So an independent study has documented that nearly 55% of Florida's 4 million children are living in or near poverty. And this inhibits access to necessities such as clean drinking water and also contributes to higher concentrations of air pollutions. Since before I mentioned, a lot of impoverished and minority communities have a lot of landfills placed within them by the city. So all this unregulated anthropogenic pollutants leads to over 102,000 children dying to respiratory complications per year. And that's just the beginning of who's affected. So to move on to something that's more economic is farmland and agriculture, which isn't close to equal. Caucasians account for 96% of all farmland owners, 97% of all farmland value, and 98% of all total acres that are privately owned, despite African Americans being 13% of population. And oftentimes people of color, even when they do inherit land or do accept land, or it's passed down to them, they oftentimes have to give it up or reimburse it or liquidate it entirely because they don't have the monetary contributions due to years and years of segregated laws and loans and banks not lending them and federal resources not lending them what they need. So as I mentioned before, landfills and power plants are a major problem that destroys these communities. And we all know that minority communities are disproportionately affected by the toxins. But how much are they affected by it? Minority and impoverished communities are the most vulnerable to air pollution, and pollution can cause complications to the respiratory system, as when we inhale pollutants, oftentimes it damages and causes infections within our lungs. So a lot of the times when minority communities, especially during the era of Jim Crow, were forced to live in these areas that were undesirable, that didn't have the proper distribution of land and resources and availability of infrastructure, it became very obvious that there are very high concentration of air pollutants in these communities. So much so that across the globe, we can see an upwards of 13.2 million deaths just due to pollutants caused by humans alone. But you may say, well, it's happening across the world. We live in an era where that's no longer the case. And we moved past Jim Crow and installed equitable laws and legislation, which unfortunately is not the case. And an example of this is in the early 1800s, Coconut Grove was predominantly Black, but when it became integrated into the Miami government, it became highly segregated, which in 1926 led to an incinerator deal being made to pretty much eradicate the trash problem that was affecting the predominantly white community. So much so that schools within yards of the incinerator had to limit access to avoid future respiratory issues occurring, and kids didn't have access to all these nice amenities and swings and public parks, and even when they did, it was limited. So a question I like to pose is, what do people think are the solutions to these occurring problems and predicaments? Could be anything.
Organizing.
I heard organizing. Yes, that's a good one.
The
Doing
legislation.
research.
What was that? I'm sorry.
Doing research.
Yes. I heard one more.
Well, legislation to create
Yes,
legal
that's
structure.
a really good.
Oh,
Sorry.
I'm sorry. I was on
That's
mute.
no, you're fine. What did you say?
I was gonna say to give incentives to businesses to invest in areas that are underserved and don't have, adequate food resources and things like that.
Most certainly, that's a really good one. But some solutions that I propose as well are what was mentioned before, which is legislation, voting for bills and laws to be implemented into our government system. And some national and regional political figures are recognizing this. I'm sure you can all think of examples of people that have advocated for climate change and business and infrastructure reformation so that we can put minority communities and communities that are predominantly affected by these issues at the forefront of representation. And this can lead to trillions of dollars being invested over a few decades to help these disadvantaged communities. And we've already seen it happen with the proposal of the COVID relief in the summer, we're going to have a meeting in Congress, not me personally, but congressmen and congress people are going to have a meeting to discuss how to invest in infrastructure. And we as a community can vote in and out Congress members in order to advocate for those things. Another really good way is donating to nonprofits. There are dozens of organizations that try to successfully invest in minority communities. A few examples I include are the Community Coalition, which is located in Los Angeles, California, and the Black Youth Project. And I'm sure that you guys can think of many more as well. And bringing awareness through any means necessary. A lot of the times when we think of bringing awareness, we think of going onto a podium or doing what me and Karim are doing, which is presenting to a large, I saw someone typed in the chat. Yes, that's a really good one as well. But bring awareness through any means necessary. It could be something as simple as a social media post to a link to a GoFundMe to help with these communities. We live in an age where these issues of meeting aren't as prominent, especially during COVID. Using this to our advantage is pretty much our only option, since meeting in person has been made more and more difficult. But talking to friends, scheduling meetups, meeting on social platforms, making videos, anything that you can do to raise awareness and prevent these issues from reoccurring is pretty much the go-to solution. And additional ones are volunteering, leading organizations, donating resources such as canned goods or toothbrushes or anything of that nature, and purchasing from local farms and businesses so that we can support their enterprises as well. To conclude, environmental racism is still something that is unfortunately at large. And with climate change rapidly changing the face of our ecosystems, our biodiversity, and our living situations, it's become very difficult for these communities to continue to survive, especially when they have a history of being underdeveloped and underfunded. They've been neglected and abused for far too long, and it's time to instill upon future generations and even past and current generations the knowledge to change, because we are stronger together. And I thank you all for listening.
Okay, thank you. Corey, we'll come back to you with some questions, I'm sure, at the end. We'll go on to Karim now.
Of course.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Oh, I have to.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. So I know that Reverend Sally said, please mute yourselves, but I will like to encourage the opposite for my presentation. What I like to do is, instead of me talking to my computer the whole time, as a student, I know it's kind of hard to grasp things through a screen, so I kind of made my presentation very interactive. So if you guys would like to stay unmuted, I think that's even better. I will be asking questions and you guys will be able to voice your feedback throughout the whole presentation, which makes it, I think, a lot more enjoyable and easier to learn from. So now that that is said, my presentation is called A Sustainable Diet. My name is Karim Dergal, and to tell you a little bit about myself, I love to run, I love to cook, and we'll get this started. So my first question, we're starting off with a big one, is why is being sustainable important?
We have limited resources on Earth.
100%. Does anyone else want to give a different?
That which is not sustained will end.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, so being sustainable in definition means that you're able to do it forever without any repercussions. Environmentally speaking, we know that we live on a very finite Earth. Everything that we use has an end, and we can't be using things unsustainably, because if we base our whole world is based off of using resources that we can't replenish, then it's going to crash eventually. So I have a series of pictures here, and I want you guys to say the first things that come to mind, just absolutely anything. So you guys can go ahead, just say, you can just brainstorm to me what comes to mind when you see this picture.
Increased environmental disasters.
What disaster do you see, or do you think could affect this?
It looks like a hurricane or a flood.
Rising sea levels.
Yeah, sea level rise.
Absolutely.
That reminds me of Galveston.
Yeah. What about this picture?
Ooh.
What do you guys see, or what do you not see?
Dead coral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No fish.
No fish, exactly. It's really sad, but there's no fish there. And what about this picture?
California.
California.
California. Well,
Australia.
Mm.
also, there was a lot over there.
Every year.
Mm. Drought.
Drought. Yep. Drought.
Looks like Marin County's picture of their lake, their reservoir, which was in the paper yesterday or the day before.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's also a huge issue.
Death Valley.
Okay, so yeah, all the ones that you guys said were spot on. and they're all a result of climate change and the current trend of climate change, which is global warming, as I'm sure most of you know. And global warming does result in an increase in hurricane strength and frequency, as well as sea level rise. This is because hurricanes are stronger when the temperature is warmer, and it contributes to sea level rise through something called hydrothermal expansion, which means when the temperature is hotter, the molecules in the water will move around more, so the water will expand. Coral bleaching, the ocean is now absorbing a lot more carbon than it used to, which is an acidic content. So it's kind of acidifying the ocean, and all the bacteria and all the organisms that live on the coral are just dying off, and it just destroys the whole ecosystem, as well as the increase in wildfire strength and frequency. And at the bottom, I have a phrase that I say, well, just a small comparison, that's Earth is like the human body. So does anyone want to try to make any relations between those two?
The earth has a fever, is sick.
Yeah.
Right, and when the earth, like when human beings don't get enough water, they die.
Definitely. Yeah. Both of those are spot on. So
The Earth, I'm sorry, I was just thinking that the Earth has many systems, and so does human body, and they can get out of balance quite easily and make you sick and die.
most definitely. Well, now I don't have anything else left to say. You guys said it all. So everything is interdependent. Everything is connected to each other. So when one thing is is not working anymore, it's obviously going to impact the rest. But I like the first one that you guys mentioned. Earth has a fever. It was actually what I was going to get to. So a lot of people, when they hear that the temperature is raising 2 or 3 degrees, it doesn't sound that big. But you have to compare it to a human body. If our temperature raised by 2 or 3 degrees, we'd probably go to the doctor, because that's not normal and it's not healthy for us. And neither is it for Earth, because everything is interdependent. Okay, so here I have a chart which shows the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect, for those of you who don't know, is kind of the biggest impact on global warming right now. So how it works is, in the atmosphere, we have different greenhouse gases, which are the ones that you hear of, like carbon dioxide and methane. So when the sun rays bounce on Earth and they try to bounce back out, the increased levels of carbon dioxide and the increased levels of methane are going to trap that heat in. And that's what's making the atmosphere to be hotter. So that was just a simple chart to kind of explain it. And now I have more pictures. So what do you guys see here?
Deforestation.
Definitely. And where do you think that is?
Yeah, Amazon.
Or where do you hear of deforestation a lot?
Yeah, in Amazon.
Yeah, that is the Amazon. Or about this picture, what comes to mind?
Oh, factory farming, factory cattle.
Yeah, 100%. That's a waste lagoon.
Mm. And that lake looks horrible.
Yeah. So the
Really
lake is a waste lagoon, which is where they dump all of the waste from the cows and all of the cattle.
Mm.
And what about this picture? This one's a little more abstract. But what do you guys think it's talking about?
Small farm.
It could be
Water in, methane out.
that I was going to say it makes me think of methane gas.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And burping cows,
Mhm.
and pooping cows.
Yeah, and that is a big.
And a fair percentage of what is contributing to global warming.
Well, I
Do you
think a
know-
lot of people would look at that and think of food though, too, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
most definitely. The arrows were there to kind of like hint that it has something to do with the
Mhm.
front or the gases come out through, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting to show the cow in this beautiful pasture and how wonderful life is for that cow. And, you know, there's nothing wrong here.
Yeah.
But we can see that that's not realistic.
Yeah. Okay. So now I'm going to be talking about those specific cattle and the three things that I went through, which are land, water usage, and then greenhouse gases. And I'm going to be talking about them in respect to livestock and specifically red meat. So I know the diagram on the left, it might be a little small.
Mhm.
What it's telling you is the yellow area is the total amount of acres that are used for, or the total amount of land in the whole United States that used for pastures or range, which, as you can see, is an enormous amount of land and is more than we use for anything else.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
Right.
more than 5 times the size of Texas, which is huge. And only about 10% of total US land is used for human food, which kind of, it tells you maybe it's not really so efficient to be so dependent on those other forms of foods. And then kind of relating back to the first picture I saw, there's been a lot of investigation and statements into the Amazon's deforestation, which show that 60% of the Amazon's cleared land ends up as cattle farms and cattle pastures.
Mhm.
And now water. I heard someone earlier when I showed the first drought picture mention how, I forgot who mentioned it, but they said that, oh, a picture came out yesterday that showed this, and that's how it looks now, which used to be like a lake. But water is now a huge issue. A lot of people don't think of water as a finite resource, but in truth, we are consuming it and using it a lot faster than we can sustain it. And in respect to beef and cattle, a 1 pound of beef takes 1,800 gallons of water to produce. Now it sounds like a lot of water, but you have to raise the cow and you have to grow the feed to raise the cow. So it's really a not efficient form of farming. And to put the number into perspective, the average shower is only of 8 minutes is 17 gallons of water. So you can take almost 100 showers of 8 minutes and still use less water than it would take to produce just 1 pound of beef. And as I said, a lot of people don't think of water as a finite resource, but the picture on the right, it shows the before and after pictures of a couple of decades of the Aral Sea, which is a sea in the Middle East and in Asia, I believe. And the Soviet Union drew from that lake to make irrigation projects for farming lands. And that's a picture of the lake before and the lake now. So a lot of places worldwide are running out of water, and water is a huge issue right now. And now with greenhouse gas emissions, which is the third thing I wanted to talk about. So livestock are responsible for 36% of methane production, which is the main contributor of methane over anything, which puts it over transportation or over industry in the whole world. And methane, although it doesn't compare statistically in amounts to carbon dioxide, it's 14 times as potent, which means it traps in 14 times more heat. And another interesting fact about methane is that it also has a much shorter lifespan. So the quicker we reduce methane, we'll see the effects much quicker than by reducing carbon dioxide outputs.
Interesting.
And this is just a chart by the EPA, which shows methane. You can see enteric fermentation is just a fancy way of saying the cow's gases that they produce. And then manure management is also part of cattle farming, because the decomposition of their manure does result in a lot of methane as well. So based off of that, I'm pretty sure you guys know what direction I'm headed in with this presentation, but what do you guys think we can do?
Plant-based foods.
Definitely. And what about not just plant-based foods? What if you can take it further? How else can you be more sustainable with your diet?
To add on to what was iterated before, plant-based foods, perhaps cooking more or using more of the resources we have abundantly available rather than just going out getting fast food and we don't know how wasteful they are there.
Oh, like 100%. I definitely agree.
Cook your food on a induction cooktop. It uses very, very little electricity. And if you are cooking on gas, you are contributing to the
Yeah,
Buy organic in order to promote an industry that can actually save us.
yeah, definitely.
Growing your own food.
Oh, that's my favorite one. I think growing your own food is actually one of the least common things people do that is widely available to everyone. And what a lot of people don't know is that even from the supermarket, if you buy little leaves of basil, you can plant those leaves of basil and they'll grow into more and more basil. So there's a lot of things that you can do like that, like smaller tricks for gardening yourself, which I also think are really cool.
I don't know if anybody mentioned it, but buying local, we are so
Yeah,
fortunate
that
to
was
live
gonna
in
be
an area where we can get such delicious food that's,
Mhm.
you know, fresh and
Yeah.
down
So
the
a lot of those local foods, a lot of the foods that we buy in supermarkets are transported from around the world. And you can imagine that the carbon footprint, or you can imagine the greenhouse gas emissions related to flying some food from say, Brazil, like soy, all the way up to the US is not going to be very efficient. So buying local is one of the best ones. And
Chilean, we don't need Chilean grapes right now. We can wait.
Yes.
buying foods that are in season. Mhm.
California olive oil is delicious. You don't need to import it from Italy.
I'm gonna have to try it, but when I'm in California.
Oh, right.
I don't want to import it from California to Florida. Yeah, so plant-forward diet. A plant-forward diet places emphasis on substituting your meals with plant-based meals, but not being completely plant-based. Because a lot of people think a full switch is going to be like really hard, and for a lot of people it can be really hard. But it's not really about having a whole entire group of perfect people. And I like to say this a lot, that the entire population being on a plant-forward diet is going to do so much more than a small population being completely plant-based. So a plant-forward diet is just incorporating, whenever you can, more plant-based meals. So if you go out to Burger King, for example, if someone wants Burger King, instead of getting a normal Whopper, they can get an Impossible Whopper. And that's incorporating one thing. Or if you decide on Mondays that you're not going to eat any meat, that's another thing. So it's just a buildup of meals that adds up to your carbon footprint and your water footprint. And it's just overall great for the environment. And if you're still curious, these are my 3 favorite documentaries, which kind of talk about every single topic. What the Health talks about your health. Because a lot of people also have the stigma that plant-based diets aren't really sustainable for yourself, like as a human, that you can't really thrive on them. So that really goes into that. Cowspiracy talks a lot about the planet and the meat and dairy industry. And then my personal favorite is called The Game Changers. It talks a lot about athleticism and how it can actually help you increase your athleticism. And it's really interesting because it breaks a lot of stigmas that a lot of people still have. And I know documentaries are much more able to communicate a point than a presentation through Zoom can. So that's why I really encourage people to branch out there. Even if it's not these 3, you can look for one that you might find more interesting. And of course, I'm a high school student, so I'm very used to citing my sources. So these are my sources for all the information that I got, and they're all from government reviewed or government published sources or research institutions, because I don't want to have like biased looking statistics that some people in some schools may think here. So these are my sources, and that will conclude my presentation. Thank you guys so much.
Good job. Wonderful presentation, Karim.
Thank you, Karim. Corey, I want you to come back into view, and I'd like to open it up to questions. And I have a couple, but we'll let others go first. Anybody have anything there?
Well, I wonder a little bit about growing your own food and what this does to carbon footprint. I'm told that if you toast a piece of toast, you have used a lot more energy than was made in making the bread to start with from the time the bread is harvested to the time it's delivered to your store and you buy it and take it home. Likewise, I know that a big bakery that's baking thousands of loaves of bread in an oven probably uses 1/10 as much heat as you do baking your own bread at home.
Yeah.
So some things about large farming are actually more efficient and large industrial food processing. Others are very inefficient. So do you like toast? Do you have toast personally?
Yeah.
Yes.
I
think-
very rarely have toast anymore since I was told that.
Yeah.
I think in terms of energy, it is more efficient, but it's only if those places were able to be implemented in a more local way rather than having one per state, because then the distribution and the amount of food waste that occurs would also kind of add to the whole footprint, the ecological footprint overall.
And thinking about it on a more economical scale is those businesses are also competing with large industrialized businesses that can mass produce it using their own inefficient yet lucrative ways. So it's very good to be aware of where these businesses are so that we can support them rather than going to Publix or Walmart or what have you.
One of the downsides of megafarms is the loss of topsoil. Smaller farms would often be surrounded by trees so that winds would not disturb the topsoil. But the mega farms have resulted in huge losses of topsoil in the Midwest here in the United States. The wind comes in and blows it off. So you're losing your growing soil because of this vast expanse of unprotected land.
Another problem is their monoculture, and that really disturbs the intricacies of the, the insects and birds and all that need a variety. And so it just further upsets the balance of nature.
So we've recommended that you all see Kiss the Ground, which talks a lot about the problem that George just brought up in terms of losing topsoil and the way that mega farms operate to produce food for us is actually depleting the soil of the nutrients so that the food we get is not as nutritious as it once was. And also it's not absorbing the carbon dioxide in the same amount that it once was. But I'd like to ask Corey and Karim, if you're comfortable sharing this, a more personal question as a young person. I'm wondering if you could talk to us about how you are feeling as you look at the world today and the future today. What are your feelings about the generations that have gone on, before you, whose lifestyles, whose way of living and using the planet have helped to create the climate crisis? When you think about kind of your generation, the tipping points that we hear are often 2050, say, maybe you'll be in your mid 40s at that time. I mean, what feelings do you have around kind of being the ones left holding the bag, the hot bag?
So I can go first. And I thought about this question for a long time and how to address it. But I think I was listening to a podcast and it described it perfectly. And it's that a lot of the generations that precede me can remember and reminisce on times that are extremely fun and have kind of nostalgia for those times, going to arcades, going to public amenities, enjoying getting their first house, going on their first date, so on and so forth. Meanwhile, while our generation definitely has its privileges and definitely has access to so many equitable platforms to express oneself on, a lot of it has been commercialized and a lot of it has been used for the benefit of other people rather than the general population. So when I look and I see all these injustices happening across the world, and I see so many people losing homes due to decisions made that were outside their power, by decisions that they had no contribution towards, or they were born and raised in impoverished neighborhoods due to long systemic issues, it's very, very impactful to how I view my life and how I've gone pretty much lived a privileged life. And I want to advocate for those people so that they can live a life that's just as joy-filled and just as nostalgic, and they can reflect and enjoy the moments rather than having to worry, okay, if this hurricane comes, will I still have my house tomorrow? Tomorrow, will I still have a warm plate of food? In 20 years, will this coastline still be available to live on, or will it be flooded?
I guess my answer to that question would be, obviously the statistics and the whole climate movement and everything, it's not really transgenerational. It hasn't really gone through many generations. It's much more of a recent thing. So I don't think it's all that fair to kind of judge all the past generations for contributing to climate change and fossil fuels and everything. Because, you know, when fossil fuels started, they were amazing. They were great, you know, and everything. There were no repercussions when fossil fuels first started. And it's only with time that we were able to see, oh, you know, there definitely is some repercussions to everything that we're doing to the climate. And the time span in which that has happened, it hasn't really been large enough to cause, or it hasn't been large enough to make big changes in lifestyles, or to make big changes like worldwide in order to fix the issue. Like, there have been relatively short time spans where we found out that, wow, we need to change our transportation system or our dependence on fossil fuels. You know, that's still something we found out maybe 30 years ago at most, or like at least about 30 years ago, that kind of began to gain traction, and that whole movement began to gain traction. And that's not really a long time. It's not really a long time. So I feel like it would be unjust to kind of judge past generations for affecting the climate like they have, because I know for most people, like, it just was such an everyday thing, a very normal thing, that it didn't really seem like they were harming the environment.
Karim, I happen to know that you are a faithful vegan. And I also happen to know that growing up, you like a burger better than anyone I know, and a big piece of steak. So you've given that up entirely. And actually, you're the reason that I'm a vegan. But I want you to talk about that sacrifice and how that was for you, and what would you dare to recommend in terms of diet choice to the rest of us here?
Yeah. Well, everyone has different values and different things that drive them the most. You know, for people who are vegan, they'll say several different things. You know, the top three being, oh, I'm vegan for the environment, or oh, I'm vegan for my health, or I'm vegan for the animals, and for ethical reasons. So once you find the one that motivates you and the one that drives through the sacrifices that you have to make, and the sacrifices that I made in terms of giving up some small dietary things, like some burgers or some steaks, like, at the end of the day, it is most definitely worth it, and I would do it again every single time. But that's just because those ideals clicked with me. Those three ideals clicked with me. And in terms of dietary replacements, it just depends what your preferences are. If you do like meat and if you could never give it up, then I would suggest some meat substitutes that are quite similar. There's still a lot that are being worked on, but like Beyond Meat or Impossible Meat are the two biggest ones. Or conversely, you could, I think, lab-grown meat, which is more beneficial for the environment. If you still want that same texture, the same everything, you could also go for lab-grown meat if you really have to. But ideally, transitioning to like a whole food diet would be the best for the environment and for your health.
I have a question for either Corey or Karim.
Yeah.
Can you either of you speak to how online shopping, which really increased a lot during COVID, and that impact on well, both, yeah, environmental racism, but also on sustainability?
Corey,
You want to handle this one first? Oh,
Or just on climate change, you know, just what's your opinion about shopping online?
Right. And to address this kind of addresses a lot of things, but more specifically into what I was presenting, online shopping, online platforms that utilize the internet in order to spread a brand aren't not sustainable. And we've seen this, we've seen how many jobs and infrastructures have collapsed in COVID, while Amazon's made so much more of a profit since everyone's staying inside. So it contributes to injustices, it contributes to a lot of people losing out on jobs and infrastructure, and it contributes to a lot of environmental injustices and definitely to climate change, because that's a large carbon footprint of having the delivery truck deliver so many packages within a short amount of time, shipping those packages through airplane, which releases tons and tons of carbon pollution. So definitely, it's definitely had its impact on our planet, and our transition towards it has definitely had increased our impact.
Thank you.
Of course, thank you for the question. Karim, you want to answer on it, or?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. That was great.
Thank you.
You know,
but does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah,
Or-
Arthur.
what I was thinking about when you were presenting is here in California, the city of Richmond, which is in the Bay Area, has several oil refineries and other chemical plants which are have had huge impacts in terms of air pollution. And that city has kind of mobilized itself and sort of put these refineries on notice that they're watching, and that they're going to insist that the refineries follow the regulations. And this has been going on for like 25 years. And there's quite a strong coalition, even electing people to the city council and so forth. So that's one of the things that I see as a possibility for, you know, or at least trying to reduce some of this environmental, degradation, the impacts. Also, we've had plans here in the Bay Area to, or proposals to have coal, what are they?
Plants?
Not so much plants, but facilities where coal can be exported.
Transshipment terminal.
Yeah, coal terminals. And there's been quite a movement to stop that from happening. Pretty successful, actually. So those are a couple things that come to mind as kind of encouraging, examples.
Most certainly. And to add on to your point as well, I am working with the Representative Woodson, who is the Democratic representative of Broward, and she, along with a lot of other people in various groups, are organizing to tackle a lot of the issues that are facing these communities. But one that relates very, very closely to the point that you brought up was Nestle, which is the water brand, has unfortunately been taking a lot of the pure and clean water within our springs and using it for profit without paying the local communities. So basically they're profiteering off of the naturally occurring resource. So it's definitely an issue that happens all across the world, but that's a local one as well.
So, and tell us what you know, since you're from Florida, from the Miami area. Miami is one of those endangered cities, right? What what's the latest on that, and what is the city of Miami doing to prepare for the rise in sea level?
I know in Miami Beach, they've already, well, first of all, their storm drainage systems, they completely renovated. They raised all their seawalls. They elevated all the floor and like the entirety of Miami Beach, which is like an island. Miami Beach is an island, like a really large island. It's its own city that's like right next to Miami. So yeah, they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on kind of raising the floor, raising the seawalls, installing better pumps, and installing better drainage systems to get rid of floods when they do occur. And as for the city of Miami, it was actually just recently that we elected a representative that's more aware of climate change instead of someone who wanted to kind of rub it off. So we haven't really seen much on that so far, but I'm pretty hopeful that they're going to do something.
What's the temperature there, Corey? I see you have your fan on.
In my house, it's a cool 69 degrees because my parents like it freezing. But outside it is unbearable. And as you can see, I'm wearing a sweater and a button up to look fancy for you guys, but it was not comfortable walking my dogs in this, let me tell you.
I
So
know
it is
that,
hot.
yeah, I know on my little street in the last couple years, as it's been getting warmer here in the Bay Area, which usually it's very temperate. You know, I know 3 neighbors that have added air conditioning to like one of their rooms or something. And it, you know, and it's so tempting, but even though it's not hot that often here, relatively speaking, but it's like that just contributes to the problem. And this is a very, like, Berkeley is a really progressive place. These, you know, people are wonderful, very progressive people, but it's just it's a hard cycle, you know, that and a difficult cycle that we're getting into.
Most certainly.
Yeah, and actually that I didn't really mean to get off on that, but I did want to just let you know about a local resource because I saw in your nonprofits and it just seems like a great model. It's called Planting Justice, and it's in West Oakland, which is, I don't know with gentrification, but it has historically been predominantly African-American community. And this nonprofit has built community gardens because it is also a food ghetto. And they hire former felons when they get out of prison because it's so hard, you know, for them to get jobs, and they pay them above minimum wage And so I just thought that's a great kind of tackling both the need for local good food and also creating jobs for local people who, you know, have been the victims of our criminal justice system, most likely. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you so much. And I've copied it down because that's a really good resource to look into. Thank you.
Suzanne has a hand up back here.
Thank
Yes,
you.
I meant to point out people with hands up. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you so much. Two things. First, I just wanted to really compliment both of you. I'm really impressed with how knowledgeable you have both become on this subject, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. We really, really appreciate it. I wanted to get both of your reactions to Biden's announcement this morning that his goal is for the US to reduce carbon emissions by 50% of 2005 levels by 2030. What is your feeling about that? Is it enough? Were you surprised? Were you happy? How did you feel about it?
I can go first, Corey, if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Obviously, still being dependent on fossil fuels is never like a great thing to be, but I'm not knowledgeable in politics and in policy. And I know like the whole infrastructure of the whole United States is already dependent on that. So I know kind of transitioning to like a lot more renewable energy sources would be a lot more complicated. But I think it's a step in the right direction. I don't think that should be the end goal. I obviously think we should go beyond that when the time is right. But I think that's a good start.
I concur completely that it's a really good step in the right direction, and it brings a lot of attention to the issue. But we can always try and do better. And I see another person with their hand up.
Yeah, hi. Well, first of all, thank you both so much for your presentations. I think we all could feel the passion and the knowledge that you both have. And I wish I were 20 years younger and I would go with the same passion out there. But you showed us why we should have an interest in climate change and why it is so important. So you basically gave us a face. I have one question each, but you're more than welcome to answer both if you like. Okay, Corey first. So in your presentation, you showed that racism has many forms, and one of that is environmental racism, which connects to climate change. But we could agree that climate change is one part, and then the other part is probably income disparity or inequality between race. So in order to address environmental racism, would you say we also have to address inequality at the same time? And if so, what would you suggest? And then Karim, you showed that in your presentation that sustainability is very important, and what we're doing right now is not sustainable. At the same time, we have stakeholders from various industries who have conflicting agendas or purposes. So we have to come to an agreement somehow where some parts have to make some sacrifices or have to give in somehow in order to come to a consensus. And that is across industries, but it's also on an international level, because it's not only a US problem. Climate change or global warming is a global and international challenge. So the question for you would be, if you could be president of the United States for one day, what would you do?
Those are really good questions, I have to say. Yes, those are really good ones. And they really do make you think. And yes, of course, climate change is one level, and environmental injustice is one level of a very ingrained an oppressive system that we have to look at all fronts, in terms of healthcare distribution, in terms of income distribution. We all are very well aware that income is very concentrated within a certain socioeconomic group, and it's not people of color, it's not minority groups or impoverished areas. So yes, in terms of how we look at it, we have to look at it from every single angle, because if people are not given the same equities and given the same opportunities to benefit, then these behaviors of sort of that are deemed wasteful, such as using plastic water bottles or using non-renewable sources, are going to continue and continue to procreate and continue to fester and be embedded into our everyday lives. But how do we combat it is a very difficult question to answer, because since there's so many fronts and so many things to deal with, it can be legislative, it can be communal, it can be environmental, economic. So we all have to kind of figure out our own way to deal with those problems, but also as a community see and say, okay, this frontier is struggling, how do we deal with it, and how does this impact help alleviate problems in other areas, and it trickles down and affects more and more communities positively. So just focusing on probably the biggest areas of concern, and then of course aiding them in areas that are local or in predicaments that are less seen or less advocated for, if that helps at all.
Okay, so I guess I'll answer my question now. It is a bit of a loaded question, so I'll kind of narrow it down to the focus of my presentation. And disregarding lobbying groups, because I know they have a lot of political influence that sometimes makes for the right things to happen impossible to happen. So I guess disregarding them, I would kind of make it a more mandatory and local thing to have food and to have farms on a local level. So I think each city should be responsible for having their farms that feeds their community, or that at least provides the basic amount of food that their communities need. And any surpluses for enjoyment or for anything else, I think should be able to, obviously you can get them from wherever else, but to the main point, like I do think every city shouldn't be dependent on importing food. I think every city should have the ability to make and create their food for all their population. And I think that would be like my biggest thing that's related to this, at least.
And to kind of piggyback off of what Karim established, which is every community does their own part, especially supporting local infrastructure. I was researching a lot before this presentation, but Washington, D.C. implemented a plastic bag fee, and 80% of residents reported using fewer bags, and it decreased in Santa Monica as well, which had a hybrid of using a fee and also a plastic bag ban. It decreased from 69% of participants using plastic bags to 0% after the hybrid of fees and plastic bag bans in certain areas. So it does work. It does work to advocate for this legislation to be implemented.
Well, I want to thank both of you. We're coming to the end of our time. If there are no more questions, I would just like us all to say thank you. Thank you so much for your.
Thanks, guys. Good job.
Yay.
And I want to
Thank
say
you.
that what gives me hope for the future at this sort of dark time in human history are young people like you.
Thank you so much.
You give me joy, and you give me hope that the world's going to be okay. So thank you.
Amen.
Thank you so much. And I hope, well, I don't hope, I know we can all do our part and do the best we can to help our environment. I know we can do it.
All right.
Absolutely.
So remind you all, tomorrow Myung is going to be presenting a fascinating topic that has to do with a whole new anthropology. I don't really articulate it clearly because I'm not clear exactly where he's going with it, but I'm looking forward to finding out about what we need to do to sort of change our definition of who we are as human beings. And I think it's going to be fascinating. So I thank you all for being here today. I am deeply grateful to Corey and Karim. It was a delight, a joy to have you a part of this whole week that we've been focusing on the climate. So blessings.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening, and I wish you a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.